Based on factors such as the literary sources, archaeological evidence, place names, and similarities in religion, I believe that all of this information can only point to the Macedonians being Greek and to speaking Greek. For example, the proper name for the Macedonians, that's Macedones, is a Greek word that means highlanders. The Macedonians had the same Greek pantheon as the Greeks. The god Dionysus was a particularly important one to the Macedonians. Towards the end of his reign, Alexander the Great, for example, came to identify himself more with Dionysus than with any other god or his Greek ancestors and heroes. And he was descended from Heracles on his father's side and Achilles on his mother's side. As far as the literary sources go, these span several centuries and all seem to agree on the one thing: the Macedonians were Greek. So our earliest source, the epic poet Hesiod, who was writing in the middle of the 8th century, and then Herodotus, who, as we know, was writing in the middle of the 5th century, and then someone as late as the Athenian orator Isocrates, writing in the later 4th century, all of these, over this period of time, had no problem tracing the origins of the first Macedonian king, a man called Perdiccas, to Argos in the Peloponnese. That's where the belief that the Macedonian ruling family came from. Perdiccas is also a Greek name. It may mean something like peridikaios, something to do with justice. Herodotus also tells us that Alexander I, now he was the king of Macedonia at the time of the Persian Wars, that Alexander I took part in the Olympic Games, and only Greeks could compete in these games. However, the Macedonians likely spoke a dialect, one that probably developed because of all of the different tribes with their dialects who lived on the borders of Macedonia. It was this Macedonian dialect that the Greeks presumably couldn't understand. And as a result, they called the Macedonians barbarians. We know that there was a dialect because Alexander spoke it twice, and we'll come on to that in later lectures. But for the most part, the Macedonians were speaking Greek. We never hear, for example, of Macedonian ambassadors to Athens, or vice versa, needing interpreters. And the Greek tragic playwright Euripides was invited to Macedonia, spent the last years of his life there. And he wouldn't have been writing plays in a language other than Greek. As I said, I'm comfortable believing the Macedonians were Greeks. And in my own work, I usually put in a disclaimer along the lines of, when I talk about Macedonians, I mean the Greeks north of Mount Olympus. And when I talk about Greeks, I mean the Greeks south of Mount Olympus. This disclaimer also applies to this and the next lectures on Macedonia. And so far, it hasn't got me into trouble.